Joining me today is Henrik Palmgren. He has been the host of Red Ice Radio since 2006 and editor-in-chief as well as the webmaster of RadIceCreations.com since 2002. He is also the co-producer of Red Ice TV and involved in various film, music, video, and web-related projects. His first public speaking presentation was on the hidden roots of the European Union in Bath in the UK in 2010. And Henrik also creates the graphics and music seen and heard on the Red Ice Creations website. And his interest is in the esoteric, occult, and conspiratorial areas of life. And it is his own search into these topics that sparked the creation of very well-known Red Ice Radio and Red Ice Creations, and he is currently headquartered on the west coast of Sweden and continues to find answers to questions that in most cases seem to lead to more questions. And I am really excited to have him here. I first was introduced to Henrik back in the fall of 2010, and I really just so excited to share his personality and his vast wealth of knowledge with all of you. And like myself, he's a radio host, and he's had quite the interesting journey. So welcome, Henrik. Thank you so much for being here.
Excellent. Nice to be here, Hillary. Thank you for having me on. It's great to talk to you again.
Well, I'm very curious what your personal story is about getting into the topics that you navigate on your radio show, the guests that you invite. You have been exposed to an extraordinary amount of information over the course of the years as your career as a radio host. How did it all begin with even starting up Red Ice Radio to deliver the material that you deliver on a worldwide level?
Well, Red Ice Radio was obviously a spawned from RadIceCreations.com, just a news website basically at the beginning. I think I first booked the URL back in 2001 or something like that, and just published news up until 2006, where a good friend of mine, Christopher Morse, had his own radio show on the BBS radio network, and I was actually offered kind of a little spot on his show first as a kind of a European correspondent, if you will. But that turned out to be I got a full hour myself, so I started doing a telephone service calling through the BBS radio network, and basically just took it from there. And I think I probably wouldn't have gone down that road if I wasn't offered it to begin with. I hadn't really contemplated the idea of having a radio show, but that was still pretty early in the whole podcast era, as it were. I mean, now there's so many radio shows out there, and it still was back in 2006, but there's quite a bit more around these days than back in 2006. So in that regard, I started up basically on a request from a friend, and has developed, in various different areas and topics since that point. There's just so many things that have unfolded, and I've been thinking about the idea of what actually started the whole process as well, why I even started the website to begin with. And I think in the past, when I've been asked that question, I often asked 9/11 being the reason for that, as so many other people have as well. But actually thinking about it more, I actually think the movie The Matrix, come to think of it, is actually probably the biggest influence on the idea of looking behind the veil of what is going on in terms of reality. And then things have obviously on a geopolitical scale just unfolded since 9/11 more and more and more. But it might seem kind of weird, a movie like The Matrix to spawn these kinds of ideas. But I guess that's actually that is it for me in that regard. And so many things I've added on from that, of course. But the whole idea of looking into something on a deeper level, looking at the Matrix, looking at reality at large, and then obviously from that, both on a metaphysical level, but also on a geopolitical and conspiratorial level. I mean, a movie like The Matrix can be seen from so many different angles and levels, and I think that's one thing that has developed for me throughout the years, that whatever level you look at and try to figure out, as soon as you feel you have the grasp on one of the levels, at least a little bit, then there's just an endless amount of more levels to that, going all the way from the physical up into the metaphysical. But I think the Matrix movie actually has been a big influence, probably not only on me, but a lot of people out there as well. It's coming up all the time as a reference.
Yeah, and worldwide influence. Your show has gained a worldwide an audience that listens on a regular basis, and the material that you share ranges from everything from health and healing to exopolitics and everything in between. When you began the show, did you have the intention set that this was the material that you wanted to get out?
Yeah, I think so in one way. I mean, these are just things I've always personally been interested in. And this goes back, obviously, further back than just the movie Matrix that came out in 1999. This goes back way back when I was much younger. Always just had an interest in mysteries, basically, of the world. Everything from how the pyramids were built to the legend of Atlantis, up to even murders of certain politicians and things like that. Why these things happened on a geopolitical scale, but. These topics I've always been interested in, and just wanted to cover them in a thorough kind of way. But certainly many of the topics also have been brought to my attention by doing the kind of work I'm now doing, of course. So I've been true to the idea of just trying to go with the flow. It seems that there is a kind of a current that almost is taking you in a certain direction at times, and there's a mass of an influx of certain type of information at a particular point in time. And I think that the trick, but also the beauty of it, is try to just surf on the different waves of information that is out there and kind of comes your way in a way. But a lot of the things, obviously, it's just things I've always been aware of in one level or another, and then just try to go deeper into that in order to personally actually get some of the answers that I'm trying to dig out. And then kind of as a side effect to that, by doing it online and sharing it and just putting it out there, more and more people can just, take advantage, I guess, in that sense, of the material that is there and kind of go along in that journey, if you will. So it's been great, and it's amazing.
Do you feel that this is fulfilling your purpose in a sense here?
I guess it is in one way. Again, going back to the idea of how the website was spawned or how it grew. The ideas of how it all came together, thinking about it in hindsight, even sitting learning HTML and PHP code programming and learning the basics in terms of graphic design and things like that. There was just kind of something I was interested in doing, and then I didn't really have a lot of the content actually to fill in the templates that I learned to create and build. But that revelation of the whole information wave kind of came on later, and then by that time I already had some basic knowledge in how to make a website and put things together. So it all kind of just flowed through very nicely, and it's been actually a very easy road in that sense for me to travel down when it comes to the creation of Red Ice and Red Ice Radio. So just going with the flow of things makes me feel that I'm kind of on the right path. It hasn't been that much resistance, but other things I've been trying to do throughout my life, music and artistically, and things have had more resistance of trying to get into the mainstream world of music production and things like that, and it's been more heavy and more of a burden in that sense. But this has come so easy. So just as long as you go with the flow, I think you're on the right path, and then you're doing what you're meant to do in one way. Yeah.
I think those are very wise words, and I think people will look back on your life and what you've contributed to the awakening of humanity as a very important lesson that people need to pay attention to, especially now, and even as we move into other, times and challenges as a, species or even individuals, going with the flow and really taking the path of least resistance is a gem of wise words. Now, moving into, talking to the people that you speak with every week, do you feel that it is, in a sense, an opportunity of your own enlightenment to have conversations with some of the world's most brilliant free thinkers and truth seekers?
Oh, absolutely. Of course it is. It's a great honor in many cases to speak with many other people who I've been listening to, and in many cases admired on many levels for the kind of work they do, from the particular perspective they hold, philosophically or what have you in that sense. But yeah, of course, absolutely, that's been really great to get an opportunity to get closer, to some of these people as well, and also alongside that, also obviously discovering that these are these are also regular people, just like anybody in that sense, and they're just doing the research, doing the work, and as we all try to do. And in some regards, I can feel that if you might be a listener from the outside, sometimes you might feel that, oh, this is a crowd of people who have tremendous inner, they're on the inside in some way. They have access to information that I don't have, or something like that. But what I've noticed and feel in most cases is that the answers are there to find for anybody, and it's basically just about time. Those who have time and obviously interest, and then who are in that flow that I mentioned earlier, that those people are obviously they have something special and hold something special, but at the same time it's not a unique thing. I think everybody can tap into the stream of knowledge that is out there, obviously. And I think it, for me personally, has brought a more human perspective to everything, and it makes it a little bit more, you get a different perspective on it by being on the other side of a mic, if I put it that way. Yeah.
Well, I can relate on some levels. Thank you.
Sure again.
Thank you for sharing that. I think the listeners will enjoy that. Not only mine, but yours that are listening, because I think your personal story is important to people, because you really do allow a certain level of frequency to ride, the world wave, if you will, in just being who you are and allowing that flow to happen. You could very well just say no to that flow and choose not to do what you do. And, they say eventually somebody else would rise to the occasion, but you have a distinct, unique energy signature that is, valuable for all of us. So I want to thank you personally for the work that you do.
Okay, well, thank you for that. That means a lot. It's I guess from my point of view, I don't see it as that big of a thing, I guess, in that regard. I don't, I guess at this point fully understand maybe the impact, or I understand obviously that we, have a lot of people out there listening to what we do, the radio show that we produce and so forth, and the TV shows and all that. But, to me, it's just, it's an average guy in one way doing an average kind of thing. It's just that it's happened to be on the fringe, if you will, in that sense, in terms of topics, if we compare to the rest of the mainstream. But thank you for that, Hillary. That's nice to hear.
Well, there are people who do this, and your heart feels like it's in the right place. You're a very approachable person. You're not, it hasn't gone to your head in many ways, and so I think that is also what resonates with people as well when they listen to you interview your guests, and I think that takes a special kind of presence. And now moving on, Henrik, I would love to hear some of your personal opinions on some topics and what really holds true to your heart, and where you're at now with what is going on, having been exposed to these different conversations and information over years, and presenting it in a way of an interviewer. What are your opinions on the world stage right now? What do you really feel is going on?
Oh God, sheesh, what a question, huh? It's the more and more you're involved, I guess is the best word, in this type of information and these kinds of topics. In one regard, I feel that there's a lot of questions that do get answers, obviously, but as you alluded to in the beginning, these in most cases you get actually more questions as well. And on top of that, I can feel sometimes that there are so many different perspectives, and if you will, kind of being as a little spider in the web in some regards, and having to pull all these different threads together from all these different researchers out there. You do indeed get I feel, unique perspective, as you do as well, Hillary. And I feel that the more we think we know, the less we know in one regard. And in some cases, I can feel that we think we know what actually is going on, but it has to do with these layers I mentioned earlier. There's always another layer to the truth, so to speak, in that regard. There's always something else to discover. There's always another perspective that hasn't been highlighted yet, that is going to either totally upset the story that we think we have, or at least offer such a unique perspective that we have to reconsider it over and over and over again. But looking at what is happening right now in the world, the larger topics as such, for even this year so far, 2011, personally, I feel it's been hectic, if you know what I mean. It's been incredibly difficult just to keep up with everything that has been unfolding. everything from right at the New Year with all these birds and fish dying, and all these stories that have been coming out about the magnetic reversal possibly being happening right now. There's so much that have been happening in terms of this strange sun activity that have been going on and off sporadically, and consequences on our own geomagnetic field. And I just personally, on a personal level, can feel it in my own life that something is happening and something is going on, and something actually has begun changing going into this year 2011. Now, what actually is the cause of this is also obviously speculation at this point. We don't know. These could be natural energies in that regard that we're just moving through, going into another level, another field in terms of the galactic plane. This might again actually be related to our solar system aligning with the galactic plane. Who knows? It might also actually just be as a mundane and down-to-earth but still scary aspect as HAARP, for instance. Actually, we were looking at manipulation of weather patterns and also maybe the magnetic field of the planet, and different things are upsetting things. But again, I think all of this, at the end of it, whatever actually is the root cause of it, has effects on the human level, from the mass down to the individual. And I think even the things we can see down in the Middle East, Egypt specifically, but also in Yemen and Tunisia right now, I think are, if you will, in one regard, they're a reflection that something actually is happening. There's a lot to say about the things that are happening in Egypt and the Middle East, and on the surface it might seem like a good thing. On the other hand, we can read reports about strings being pulled, as always, behind the scenes, encouraging these types of revolutions in order to steer these countries into a more Western, in many cases, situation, if you will. But all of this is a reflection of how uncertain things are in these times, and how shaky the ground is that we actually stand on, I feel anyway. And I think there's a lot of people that would agree with that as well. I mean, just going back to this idea of the magnetic field again, we don't know what truly the consequences of this would be, or if the magnetic field of the Earth goes down as it does before a magnetic reversal actually happens. And we might be looking at a situation where we have tremendous amounts of cosmic radiation and radiation from the sun going in, hitting us directly. And we have no idea what the consequence of that will be. We might be actually looking at a scenario where the whole electric grid goes down. We might be looking at radiation, harmful radiation coming into human beings, so disease and things like that. But on the other hand, we have this other idea that we actually might be up for a kind of an upgrade, if you will, an update of the human being, and that seems to go hand in hand with a lot of the ancient, prophecies, if you will, in terms of where we're heading right now at this particular time, and the involvement of the cosmic central sun, or our galactic sun, and also the radiation from the sun, of course. It's been very interesting seeing how this have unfolded so early now in 2011, and if we're continuing on this track, I wouldn't be surprised if we can actually see some big changes ahead of time. I don't know. It's tricky to say, but there's just so much going on right now that it's almost difficult to say and stop and have a perspective on it all. It's like impossible, because by the time you're beginning to put an analysis on one of these topics, then 2, 3, 4 more have unfolded, and it's like you're lagging behind in actually trying to keep up with it all. It's been crazy.
I do know. You're right. I mean, the average person, I talk about this a lot on the show, is that when somebody starts to dig around for alternative answers to what's going on, oftentimes they're led into conspiracy theories, they're led into disinformation campaigns. I mean, there's so many eddies of information in the world that we can get lost in, that it's difficult sometimes to really weed out the truth from what's just being presented for whatever reason. And it's not even to say that, it's one or the other. Some
Sure.
people may be well tapping in intuitively to what they feel is going on, and they're simply expressing their truth. And when somebody reads that, and it's like a domino effect, it just kind of goes all over the place and can spread. And that's what consciousness does. So what do you suggest to people when they start to listen to, let's say your archives, and they start going through, the last 20 shows you've done, and their mind and their psyche is kind of blown open because they, are being revealed and introduced to information that we certainly are not taught in school, or, we don't certainly walk around and read these in mainstream media outlets. It's kind of like a birth, an instant transformation into another kind of consciousness. And what do you suggest to people to, be able to do that smoothly with as little pain as possible?
Well, the question is if this should be with as little pain as possible. I mean, again, I remember myself listening to a lot of radio, reading a lot, learning a lot about these subjects, and I had a period, as I think most people do, if you're human anyway, you go through a period where things are just upside down. Black is white, white is black. Everything you don't understand pretty much what is going on anymore. But that's also obviously, just to say, Hillary, that's why you need to have a certain caution approaching these types of subjects. It's been mentioned by other people that, again, these are occult subjects in some regards. These are sacred subjects also in some regard. So you can't just throw yourself into it and believe you're going to, have all the answers right away or know everything right away. And I think that's, for me personally in a way, might be something that I've been a little bit different, that even though I didn't fully understand the context of something I was either listening to or reading or what have you, I just carried on because I had a hunger for information. And even if it contradicted something else, I said to myself, okay, well, let's just, let's keep it in mind. Let's have it there. Let's put it to the side, for the time being. But I'll continue to process other type of information or, read or study, and then move on from there. And eventually you build your own little view of the world in that sense. And I've always personally been of the opinion that truth is a subjective thing. I think the word truth has been thrown around quite a bit in this so-called movement, and it's been looked at in a kind of from my point of view, it's been kind of it's a little bit filthy almost to use this word in these times, because there's just so much information out there that are contradictory. And I think that for all of us or all people out there to agree on one single objective truth is a big lie, actually, in that regard. And I think that truth is supposed to be subjective. It is subjective, at least from the point of view of the human experience. And so hence sometimes, obviously, I do get email from people who are new to our program and programs like yours, Hillary, and others out there as well. And they understand this pretty quick, of course, that, wait a minute, here are contradictions in this. One guy says one thing, and then another lady comes along and says another thing, or vice versa. And this is just the way it is. It's just the nature of reality. And that's why you need to have a philosophical approach in regards to these subjects. And you shouldn't define and rule your life accordingly, at least not to begin with. You should be open-minded, I think, and have, be humble to these topics and think, okay, well, I don't have all the answers, but at the same time, neither do these people, just because they know a little bit more than I do on certain regards. So, again, taking that step back and zooming out from the whole the picture, and don't be too close, but actually have a little bit of perspective between yourself and the information. And some people are so hungry for the info, obviously so, that they just consume almost too much. And there have certainly been cases in the past, I know, where people are, it goes to their head in that regard. And I feel it's important at those times to just take a step back and take a little breather and do something else and disconnect from all of this. Because again, all of this information is in another level, and it's a strong word, but it's on another level, obviously manipulating you if you don't have the correct relationship to the information. You need to have the idea, again, I believe that this is, it's another box, if you will, of other people's perspectives that is out there, and you can jump over into these little boxes here and there. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is your own box, and obviously expanding your own box, and try to ultimately get out of that box. But again, don't rush things, don't do it too quickly, and always, of course, run the information through your filters of rationality, but also your filters of intuition and your heart-based, response. What does your heart say when you listen to some of this, or what does your, intuition say? And if it feels right to you, absolutely, go ahead, because this is, again, when we look at reality and when we look at what human consciousness is, and when we begin to scrape on these types of layers, the surface, we discovered that things are way much more weird, so to speak, than we thought they were. Maybe if we have a complement classical scientific education, or even if we come from especially if we come from an atheist background or something like that. But there's much more spiritual, consciousness-driven reality that is happening and unfolding. And therefore, again, we're back to that idea that truth is subjective. It's what you make it in that regard. That doesn't mean that there aren't certainties out there of what actually has happened in terms of history and all that too. But just always run it through your heart and go slow, easy. There's obviously a sense of urgency that I feel comes along with these subjects, and people get really they get burning red hot in one sense, and they have listened to maybe a couple of months or a year of podcasts online, and then they think they have all the answers. But in most cases, that is not the case. There's so much more going on, and I mean, this is what the greatest philosophers in many cases of our times have been questions that they've been pondering on, and I don't know if we were getting any closer to the answers of these. The main big question seems to remain in that regard, but anybody's perspective is as right as the other guys or the other girls. So intuition and just keeping your head cool, I think, is important as well, Henrik.
Well, I appreciate what you just shared, because I think it's very important for people to understand this, because a lot of it happens every day. Do you feel, as I feel, and I'm curious if you feel the same, that entering into this realm, if you will, is an act of initiation? Because you really are not the same person once you even enter the door, and black is white and white is black and the world is upside down. You go through a sort of birthing tunnel, if you will, and it's an initiation. And then it's an initiation to be able to carry the information groundedly, and navigating through it with your intuition without jumping on the bandwagon of one person's theories and fighting another person's theories. And what I see many times is that there's, almost a discontent among, quote, truth seekers, and they're not willing to work together. They don't want to,
Sure.
They reject this person's theory, or they don't like them personally. Maybe they did an event with them at some point, or whatever happens to cause that. And then the followers, if you will, end up following one person and maybe looking at another's and comparing it, and then following somebody else. It's very similar to a lot of other things that we experience in life, where we take opinions and we really wrap our box around those opinions. So staying stable within our own center and within our own heart is really the biggest key. But a lot of people don't understand what that means. So in your opinion, what is standing in your center? What is being grounded in all of this?
It is basically about listening to yourself, finding your own inner voice, finding your own fundament in that sense. What is your core and what is your center? That's nothing anybody else can tell you, I believe. That's something that only you can discover, and obviously understand the idea that you need to, in some regards, listen to other people's perspective in order to understand the possibilities of the different versions that exist out there, in order to have a reference frame, if you will, of, okay, where am I in all of this? How do I find myself? So obviously in that regard, just as we do as we're babies, when you're born into this world, you look at your surrounding. Oh, what does mommy and daddy do in one sense? But eventually it's time to stand up on your own two legs and walk and move out of the house and do your own stuff. And I feel it's the same thing here, because I totally agree with you, Hillary. I think this is an initiation process. Obviously, it is a death and a rebirth. It's an old classical, sacred religious initiation that is happening. I think that these traditions of these types of initiations have always happened in the past. And I think that they will always continue to happen in that sense. And the question is, of course, when you come out of that almost semi-religious experience, will you be one of the, Essenes in one regard, or will you be a zealot? What side of that fence are you going to be on? I think that the important thing is to, again, keep an open mind, and also be humble towards these topics, and just understand that whatever I'm thinking right now, I might be wrong. The other guy might be right. So just, take it a little bit slow and go a little bit easy, because in most cases you end up with people who are as dictatorial in their judgment of other people as the so-called dictators they're trying to, fight off, if you will, in one regard. They can critique politicians maybe for saying one thing or doing one thing, but at the same time they kind of end up being in the same way. They end up being as judgmental and as dictatorial in one sense, and telling you that's wrong, you can't think like that, or you're not allowed to talk about those subjects because those are false, or that doesn't exist, or what have you. There's so much of that out there. But again, that's just, I've always felt that just comes from a perspective of being actually still afraid, if you will, in one regard. It's about actually trying to protect the small little hierarchy that you have discovered in terms of the information that you've come across. That if you let certain things into that little reality bubble of yours, they're going to upset that pretty quick and actually pop it. So the better response to that is to try to block it out and say, nope, that doesn't exist. Whatever it is, people can read in whatever they want into this, because there's many different, reality bubbles out there. Either if you come to this from the conspiratorial bubble, or from the New Agey bubble, or from the spiritual bubble, to what have you. And I feel it's important to, again, expand your bubble as much as possible and let these things in. And if they shatter your worldview, so, well, that is it then. So go with it and try to work with it in the best way possible. But again, going back to your original question, Hillary, I think finding your center is about, in most cases, and certainly for people like you and me, this is more and more difficult, because we are involved in it all the time. We're doing interviews and we're hearing different perspectives, and we might be studying on our own and reading things. But what I've personally noticed anyway is that when I step away from it, that's the best time and best opportunity for me to actually get some find my own voice in all of this as well. It's difficult when you're in a position where you read too much or take in too much all the time to find your own voice and be centered, because you're still kind of you're like a ball on a tennis court. You're just being whacked back and forth all the time. And that's true even if you watch mainstream media all the time, contradictory information back and forth, and you don't have a chance to get in touch with your inner voice and actually listen to yourself. Well, what do I think in all this? What's my particular perspective? So again, it might sound weird in that regard, that this is all about study and learning. At the same time, it's also about taking a break from it. But again, I think that's how you achieve that balance, that you have it's a certain period of time in your life where you really study and really learn a lot of things, but then you need to, as Archimedes did, he took a bath. He needed to disconnect from the things he was trying to fix and solve in terms of density, the old mathematical problem that he was trying to fix. And the only way he could solve that is his wife was saying to him all the time, you need to take a bath, you need to relax, you need to do something else, step away from the problem so you can actually get some perspective on it. And when he did that, that's when he actually solved the puzzle. He jumped in the water and discovered density. It's a great story to tell, but it's true, I feel. Whatever the problem is, trying harder and going, against continuing the grind in that sense is not always the answer to it, but just take a breather, step back, relax. Pretty easy.
When I was listening to you talk, I was thinking of the journey of Neo in the movie The Matrix, and how, at one point he really didn't know who he was. And he questioned his abilities, and he questioned other people's beliefs in him as being, quote, the one. And he sought out the knowledge of the oracle, something that was, he believed, to hold great knowledge, to hold an understanding or a spiritual, connection to giving him more insight into himself. And the way I interpreted that, or the way I look at it now, is that, we have to find that voice. The oracle really is the voice of intuition, the voice of putting all the pieces of what we're experiencing within reality, whether it's ours or not, into our own experience, and being able to thread, the needle, so to speak, the eye of our own needle, so that we can really make something out of our own experiences. And I don't remember who it was, but somebody told me many years ago that the greatest gift you can give yourself is to take a look at your own life and figure out your own experiences and what has been unique to you. And then when you go out and seek the information, when you seek the knowledge, you validate those experiences. You validate the knowledge that you already have inside of you. And you weave your own tapestry that really becomes or ends up becoming a gift to yourself and to others in your life and in the world, really. Now, he encountered along the way, since I think it would be fun to follow the quest of Neo, since that was your inspiration. He finds these very dark forces and things that just, the virus, the gentleman that represents the virus, and these things that seem or appear to be, against him. How do you deal with darker forces in your life? How do you deal with the things that come up against you, or when people ask you questions about what appears to be these evil forces in the world? What do you tell them? How do you deal with them?
Well, I think that, again, going back to the Matrix then is a great idea of seeing how the story unfolded between Neo and Mr. Smith, how their particular battle and fight almost goes to the absurd. I think it's in the third movie where they battle each other and they beat each other up so bad and nothing seems to help. I mean, it's to the point of absurdity where they try to punch each other out. And obviously what Neo discovers is that it's not until he surrenders and gives up in one regard that he managed to overcome it. But I also feel that whole story is about letting the darker side. If Mr. Smith represents your polar opposite, your darker side, he also actually allows him to come into him. He allows him to merge actually in one way with him, which is obviously a classic idea of merging with your shadow and all that. But that's how you, in one regard, defeat it, if that's how you view it. I mean, even using that word is not the correct term, because it is not about defeating it. And the same thing could be true with discovering the dark forces that exist in the world. That the question I feel that everybody needs to ask themselves is that, is this meant to be battled in that sense? Is this meant to be eradicated? Or are we just meant to, in one regard, maybe not accept it, but think about it from the point of view of a philosophical concept, that we need to accept that it actually is existing in the world. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't do everything we can in order to try to prevent that from happening. But at the same time, if it's true that consciousness is the main, driver of reality, and if we create our own reality, then all the things that we see out there in the world, including the dark forces, however weird that might sound, are in one regard connected with us. They're stemming from us, either because we allow them to be out there, or we haven't learned to deal with them internally, so they manifest themselves externally. And there's quite a bit of people who have been doing work and research on this from various different perspectives, metaphysical or psychological. But I always think back to Paul Levy, a guy we had on the program many years ago, who talked about this in the context of war on consciousness and all that, but also what these darker forces in our world represent, and how, in one regard, we are responsible for them, but we continue to fight them in the way that Neo is fighting Mr. Smith before he realizes that he needs to actually merge with this force. In that sense, we try to make them separate from us in one regard. We try to beat them or thrash them or violently oppose them in some regard, and I don't think that's the solution in many regards. Again, it goes back to that idea that we need to have the same relationship, I think, to things that are happening in nature. Although most people would like to live in a kind of in a Disney World scenario where lambs and lions runs around with each other. What makes things tick, at least for now, doesn't mean that this might not change in the future for whatever reason, but at least for now, things are based on the fact that one thing eats another, and it's nothing evil about that. There's nothing bad about that. That's just how things work in nature. There's different ways that nature solves things in order to have its cycle, and same thing can be said about even the regular seasons. We have winter and a time of death, if you will, happening out in nature, and then we have a time of summer where things grow again, and usually the one enables the other one to exist, and they need each other. They have this kind of dialectic relationship, and again, I think that it's a reason why the powers that be have found that this dialectical way of doing things actually is working in the world, because they have mimicked it after nature. They understand that we need to have a Coca-Cola and we need to have a Pepsi-Cola to actually and let them, if you will, compete with each other. It's a dialectical relationship that they are having, these two products, and this is mirrored throughout basically all the big brands and products out there as well, of course, if we look at it from the point of view of marketing. But you have this two factions that are fighting each other, because that makes more and more people to join one side or the other. If you didn't have a battle of what is better, do you drink Pepsi or do you drink Coke or whatever? It's like it's a ridiculous thing, right, to think about this, but at the same time, it's like they understand that it needs that little level of competition. It needs that two teams playing each other, because then they become the audience, or they become the supporters of those, if it's sport team or a brand or what have you in that sense. So the elite, and same thing is true in politics, obviously. We understand this. Are you voting for the red side or the blue side? The left wing or the right wing? It's that idea of we're caught up in the dialectic, checkerboard chess game. And I think the same is true. We go back to the idea of balance again. We need to find a balance between those two different sides and realize that either we're participatory in this game, either we are Neo or we're Mr. Smith, but something else happens when we allow to let these sides, in one regard, blend or merge, or better yet, we take a step above it. We zoom out the picture and actually take a broader look at the chessboard and say, wait a minute, this is just a black player and a white player playing here. Why do I have to be involved in this particular game? Who set the rules? Who is that centerpiece that nobody's looking at? If we look at it from the point of view of politics of left wing and right wing, who's the head here in this relationship? So we're back there again. We're back to being balanced. We're back to zooming out, and we're back to the idea of letting these sides be as they are in one way. There's nothing wrong with these different sides. They're there for a reason. But if we learn to observe how they work, I feel we have a tremendous advantage over many other people in the world in that sense, who are still caught up in this ping pong game, if you will, of back and forth all the time. It's kind of exhausting watching it, actually.
Yeah, I would have to agree on that. It's an interesting theory when you look at life from that perspective. And when you realize that it's really not a theory, but it's an actual fact that we as human beings process our lives like this. And we teach our children to process their lives like this. Nobody has really reprogrammed the software, if you will, and perhaps we are crossing points in time and space at this moment where, eventually that will be possible simply by the inception of somebody believing in a different reality and sharing that with other people and spreading that through. And then we still have to own what we create in many ways. People think that, well, we can create a beautiful thought and walk away from it, but it doesn't really work like that. Our thoughts and creations are much like our own children, and we have to tend to them, and they take on a life of their own and sometimes consume you. It's an interesting process. I really think that one of the great teachings that really is common in most spiritual masters has always been the ability to walk through these things like water. And if you can find a common truth, which there are many among all the different great teachers of this world who we really hold up as, examples of enlightenment or higher understanding, and we take a look at their common, threads of truth, we can begin to weave together a beautiful truth of our own, where we really take the best parts of all and create something that is spawn of that. One of the things that that movie, The Matrix, I've always found fascinating is that when Neo ended up waking up, from this Matrix created world where he could, feel and eat and do all of these things and wear whatever he wanted. And then he woke up and it was this stark, cold I don't know, machine-like room, where he was eating oatmeal-looking, flavorless stuff. I always wondered why they depicted, waking up into the reality of the illusion as so much worse off than being in the illusion. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that's a good question. I in some regard, I can't help to think that this has, on the first level, has to do with the Gnostic, background story of the idea of the Matrix. That in one regard, it's like you're living in the dream world, and then you wake up and then you realize that things aren't. It's not a dream. It's a nightmare actually in that regard. And so on the first level, I feel it has to do with the idea that things that are of the physical plane are not that pleasant, if I put it that way. There's sickness there's disease, there's strife, and there's hunger, and there's difficulty in one regard. And again, it's back to that Gnostic idea, echoing some of the earlier religious cults and their particular relationship that they had to nature and even the human body in some regards, that this is like a prison that we need to kind of break out of almost, because we're trapped in this physical hell, actually, in some regards. So that's kind of there on the first level. At the same time, it's also an idea that they might be able to actually create the world that they want to live in. There might be a time, when we can overcome those constraints, if you will, of the physical world as well. Because, if we look at it from the point of view of Neo, he takes the abilities that he has in the Matrix, because there's certain set of rules are in place in the computer-generated world, if you will. And he manages to understand this, and therefore also overcoming those rules and be able to do what he wants in there, meaning he can fly and do all kinds of weird stuff. But at the same time, he also managed to take some of these abilities out with him into the real world afterwards, because obviously that's a deeper level of understanding. That means that, wait a minute, we're still in a kind of a matrix. The reality that we think we live in, this cold and dark place, is still kind of a coded, programmed world also in one regard. And it's up to us to create what we want with that dream. So before you have any reference to what kind of world you want to live in, I think it's going to go to the bottom, if you will. It's going to go to the lowest and darkest place, and you start from there, and you build from there. You try to create things from the deepest and darkest place in that regard, in order to create a fundament, if you will, something to stand on, and then slowly take it from there and progress upward. But I don't know. It's an interesting question, Hillary, and I have to think about that a little bit more, though, I think, and see what. To give you a good answer on that, because I really don't know yet. We'll have to see. But at the same time, I think that I believe the same thing is true in our reality, obviously, that, again, when you wake up and you realize certain things, you understand how cold, dark, and ugly and miserable place the planet is and the earth is, and human history, just looking back to that, and the misery that we've gone through collectively and all that, the wars and the suffering in many regards. But as you begin and look closer and more into it, you also understand that in going along with that, there's also a lot of beauty there. There's also a lot of wonderful things that have happened and is going to happen. And it's back to that idea again, that it's also part of what you choose to focus on, what you choose to look at. I believe that you can, as a human being today, have a wonderful life in that sense, living in your bubble, totally secluded from the problems of the world. And again, we go back to that idea that if I go out here on the street and things are pretty calm. It's not, I can't see the new world order emerging around me, everywhere. I can see little snippets of it here and there, obviously, if I look close enough. At the same time, it's not an instant application thing that is happening right now and right here. It's so what I choose to focus on also becomes part of my reality. And so again, we're back to that idea. If I only choose to focus on the negative aspects, that is how I'm going to see the world. But if I choose at some part in there to look at some of the other aspects of some of the beauty of life, then that will become part of my reality paradigm. And again, we go back to that thing that if we focus too much on all the negative, bad news, then what if that is actually participatory in creating that reality as well? It becomes a kind of a feedback loop. So it's been said before, you have to be careful what you think about and what you wish for, because it might actually, come true. So we need to not totally seclude or corner off ourselves to the darker realities of how things are unfolding in the world. At the same time, we can't just focus on that alone, because that will actually create feedback in that loop as well. So again, we're back to balance between these sides. Yeah.
We always go back to that, don't we? There's no getting away from balance. Well, it was always interesting to me that that would happen when he would wake up in that world, out of the dream world. And then when there was a scene where he went blind as he was flying, or he was flying a ship, and he was going into the city, and he was blind, and he was really seeing with energy. And I always thought that was interesting, because he was perceiving this very dark, desolate world energetically. And it seemed that he was better able to navigate his way through without looking at it directly, but more from an energetic standpoint. And then at one point, he was able to lift that ship up over the clouds, over these dark, stormy, intimidating clouds. And then you got up all the way through that, and there was this moment of clarity.
It was beautiful up there, yeah.
And it was really just something that I think most people can relate to when they feel that aha or epiphany moment in their life where everything becomes clear. And I think it's a symbolic trail, if you will, of looking through your life and saying, well, I may wake up to the illusions around me to see something that is really scary and fearful. It feels like I'm fighting the dark forces, and I can get very lost there and stuck there to see it this way. But if I lose my sight of that and I just change my perception to being about energy and realizing that really it's all the same thing, we're able to rise above that for the clarity that we need to go back into it and change it until we die.
Yeah. Yeah,
or become
absolutely.
a part of it in some other form.
That's right.
I really think that that's a beautiful moment, and I'm curious how you felt personally when you watched that part.
Yeah, I guess I would agree with you in that regard. I think that just seeing things above the clouds, for me, it's back to that idea that it's about zooming out. When you get the perspective, when you leave the earthly matters behind, there is a whole universe, world, planet above the dark skies, the dark heaven that they're kind of trapped under, that is unfolding, full of beauty and full of wonderful things that are happening. And at the same time, it's interesting because they just tip over the clouds and then they begin to descend back again, obviously, because it's like they can't fight the gravity with that big heavy ship that they're in or whatever. But so it's also that idea that it's a revelation that it's out there and it's up there, meaning heaven, if you will, symbolically is there. Yep, it's a affirmation of that. But at the same time, it means that, but hold on a second, we need to go back because there's business to settle down here on this level as well. There's things that needs to be cleared up and cleaned up, if you will. And so he's chosen a path that is, involved in that process of cleaning up things, solving some of the issues, some of the problems, and trying to restore some balance to this very unbalanced world that they live in, where these machines have taken over completely and are basically eradicating, the human family in that regard. And I think in many cases that's true to what we are part of here as well and experiencing. I don't think that our experience is about escaping the problems that are here. Because ultimately, again, if the problems are here on the physical level, on the earthly plane, then they also exist within us in some regard or another. So that means that we have external work to do, but we also have internal work to do in order to clean this up and make sure that our experience is run the right way, if you know what I mean. So we shouldn't be we should be aware of the fact that something else exists. Heaven is there, but right now it's not time to totally be involved in that. There is a little bit of a battle going on in that sense, that these different sides in ourselves, this battle between our different sides that we have, and we need to be involved in that process right now for whatever reason, and help to clean that up. So I kind of feel it's like an encouragement that, okay, it's great to know that it's there. But at the same time, it's not. We don't come to this planet. We're not incarnated into these bodies in order to just look at the beauty right now. There's work that needs to be done at the same time. Yeah.
What a beautiful testament and symbolic meaning to our lives, really. I want to thank you for joining me this hour. It's been very, very enlightening for me to listen to you talk and to share an hour of time with you and discuss ideas. And for those of you listening, you can hear Henrik on redicecreations.com, his radio and TV programs. You can find more information about them on his website. And it's really worth your time and effort to navigate through the site and listen to some of the offerings. He's a very gifted person and one of the great light workers on the planet at this time. Henrik, thank you so much for joining me, and may your journey be well.
Absolutely. Same to you. Thank you so much, Hillary. It's been great being here, great talking to you again, and we'd love to have you back on our program as well. We need to continue our conversation at some point.